Hi, I want to talk to you about appraisals as they fit into purchase of real estate in the DMV. I want to talk to you about what they really mean for buyers and what they mean for sellers. In the last couple of years or so, with the activity in the market and the high rate of competition, appraisals came into play and became things that often got waived or limited and created some situations. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that tonight. What is an appraisal? An appraisal is basically an independent third-party opinion of value. And I stress the word opinion. It is an opinion given by a professional who's trained in the matter, but it is still an opinion. There's nothing etched in stone about the value of a property. It's required by the lender as part of the approval process, and it's based primarily on comparable sales. It protects the lender and not necessarily the buyer or the seller. Who orders and pays for it? Well, it's ordered by the lender. You pay for it as the buyer in most cases, but it's ordered by the lender. It can typically cost anywhere from $400 to $800, somewhere in that range. And buyer, you as the person involved in all this, have little to say about who the appraiser is. You have little to no control over that. Now, on the one hand, that's good because you don't want to have undue influence by one of the parties in the transaction on what the appraiser says the value is. At the same time, you don't know the caliber of the person doing the appraisal. Is he or she really competent? Is this person someone who knows the area? Is this person know the latest means by which one values a property? So those are things to factor in. Who really benefits from the appraisal? Well, primarily it's the lender. You're going to pay for it as the buyer, and that money is going to come out of your pocket, but that appraisal doesn't benefit you as much as it does the lender. And the real thing that the lender gets out of this is an indication that in the event something were to happen and you lost the ability to make payments and went into default on this loan, that the lender has the ability or reasonable assurances that he has the ability to sell the property after the fact and recover and not suffer huge financial losses over the property. They want to keep properties on the books that are worth less than what they could sell them for. Secondarily, you as the buyer do get a benefit in terms of making sure that the property price that you're paying for it isn't grossly over what one could consider it's worth. So you do get that, but it's limited and it's not a hard and fast sort of thing. And the person who benefits the least is the seller. And in reality, that appraisal becomes more of a hurdle to the transaction for the seller than it becomes any sort of benefit, which is why during the frenzy of purchasing that occurred with all the competition, the seller welcomed offers and contracts that didn't have appraisals as part of it, because that appraisal meant that there could be another point of negotiation of something that had already been agreed to, or it could cause the transaction to go down completely. So the seller didn't have to deal with that, was going to be happier. So that appraisal created more of a problem for the seller in their minds than it did a benefit. There's a myth about appraisals that they tell you what the house is worth. And I touched on that at the outset here, but really need to go into this a little more deeply. It doesn't show what the house is worth. It's a professional opinion on the value of the house. It shows what one appraiser thinks based on past sales. Now, here's the thing. You're basing the value of a home today on what happened 3-6 months ago, and it doesn't factor in market momentum, it doesn't factor in bidding wars, it doesn't factor in future potential, and the worth that they come up with it's subjective. It becomes an appraised value, and the value to the buyer is not necessarily what it's appraised for. So you have to factor those things in. There are many factors that consider what a property is worth, and they're not completely tied up in what 10 houses 6 months ago sold for. And that's something that you have to factor in. Now, if your appraisal does come in low, what does that mean? Well, it means that there wasn't enough data in those past sales to document and support what you might be willing to pay for this property. And considering the fact that there often are multiple bids and competition, that may drive the price up. So that may even limit it even further, because that might be a lack of comparable data for this particular house. The house you're buying may be unique enough that there aren't many in the area like it, so that makes it a little bit tougher. And it may not align with the neighborhood that you're looking at. And in some cases, the market prices and market sales are increasing more rapidly than they can be tracked. So they can come in low. And when the appraisal does come in low, now you've got a set of circumstances to deal with. If you've been in a situation where you've negotiated on the price and push that list price down, now the seller may not be as willing to talk with you about an appraisal because now he feels he's already given up the ghost. So now is he going to have to negotiate again? Well, he's not going to be very excited about that. But you do have the right, if you've had a contingency, to go back and exercise your rights to whatever negotiation is built into your contract. What ends up having to happen is either renegotiate or the deal could fall apart. And it's interesting, and you should know that if you're buying with a VA loan or with an FHA loan, both of which are government-backed, that appraised value that comes out will stick with that house for a period of up to 6 months. So if you can't come to terms with the seller and the seller puts the house back on the market, he gets another VA or FHA buyer, he's going to be obligated to go along with that price. So there are factors like that come into play. What appraisals don't do is they don't guarantee future value. It's a snapshot of what that property is worth now, but it's not going to tell you what it's going to be worth down the road because it's not easy to come up with market factors that are going to show, because popularity of a certain neighborhood now may not be what it is 2, 3, 5 years from now. They don't take into account the condition of the property to the degree that a home inspection might. Appraisal takes roughly half an hour or so. They come in, the person who's doing it takes some pictures, does some measurements, looks at a lot of data on computer, and doesn't factor in the conditions. So that's something to keep in mind when you're discussing the appraisal. They don't take into account staging and decor. And appearance of a house does affect a buyer, and a buyer will factor those things in when he's coming to the decision as to what price he will offer to the seller. And they don't value or reflect the value you place on that property and how much you may be willing to pay for it. So in recap here, what appraisals don't factor in is they don't factor in any sort of guarantee on future value. They don't factor in what this neighborhood might look like in a few years down the road. They don't assess much in terms of condition. The appraisal process is about a half an hour, so they don't spend the 2-3 hours that the home inspector might spend looking at the house. They don't factor in staging or decor or how pretty the house is. They don't reflect how much you might value living in that house. So there are factors that an appraisal don't include when they're working up that value. There are misconceptions about appraisals. The contract price does not equal the appraised value. What you're agreeing to pay for it may not align with what the appraisal comes up with. So that's really important. When you're making your offer and you're potentially in a bidding war with someone, you have to factor that in, because you go up past a certain point and that appraisal could become a major issue in the transaction. Renovations may or may not affect the value. Some things that one does to a property can improve the value of it. Some things don't. People will spend a lot of money on the mechanical aspects of a house, which is wise because it makes sure that the condition of the property is good. But what may drive the property value up is things of a more cosmetic nature. If you renovate a kitchen that was needed, that can improve the value of a house significantly. Bathrooms, maybe not so much. If you put a bedroom in the basement, thinking that an extra basement could increase the value, that may not improve or impact the value very much at all. So there are things that you do as far as renovations that you have to factor in, may or may not have any impact on the value at all. And one thing that you need to know is that when the appraiser is coming through the property and doing that appraisal process, he or she will have a copy of your contract. They know what you've offered. They know what the contract price is. So they're working to make sure it fits, but they're not going into this blindly coming up with a value without knowing some strings that are attached to it. So it's definitely something to factor in and understand. If you're the buyer, you need to understand your appraisal contingency if you have one as part of your contract. The market's changing and it's slowed down and softened a bit, so there's more of an opportunity for you to have that. 2 or 3 years ago, having an appraisal contingency built into your offer was almost unheard of. So if you do have one, you should understand it, and you should have a plan in place if the appraisal does come in low, and it does from time to time do that. If it does come in low, then your backup plan should include perhaps more cash, because you might have to make up the deficiency in cash. You might need to renegotiate the price, and you may have to deal with a seller who isn't willing to make that concession. So you might have to realize you might have to either give up that property or spend more for it than you think you want to. And you want to have those plans in place, before you reach this, so you're not caught going, okay, now what do we do? As a seller, if you have done significant things to the property, you should make those known. Document the improvements you've made, make them available to the appraiser, have your agent share relevant comps, because like I said, this is a professional opinion of price. And so the data used can vary from source to source to source, all right? It's often wise for your agent, if you're listing the property, to have him meet at the property, because while the appraiser doesn't want to be influenced unduly by the parties in the process, they, if it's done properly, will welcome information about the property that could impact what value is finally assigned. And local market knowledge is also a good thing to keep factored in as well. Things you should understand from this discussion on the appraisal is that the appraisal is not about giving you a value of a property. It gives that to you in a sort of limited fashion, but the primary purpose of that appraisal is to protect the lender's interests in that transaction ultimately. It doesn't ultimately define the home's worth. What's really value is what a ready, willing, and able buyer is willing to pay and a seller will accept. That's what a home is worth. And that is today. 5 years from now, a price could be higher or lower. Typically the DC metro area sees 3 to 6% appreciation over time, but from 1 year to the next, it could go up or down. So buy a house today could be higher or lower next year. And those are things to factor in. The appraisal process can be frustrating. It can cause situations that you have to deal with the seller. Your agent should be a party to helping you through it and making sure you understand what goes on. And you should go into it with open eyes and not with the limited view that the appraisal assigns value and tells you what the property's worth. People will say, I'm not going to pay a cent more than the property's worth. Well, that appraisal doesn't really give you that, and it's something to think with. So I hope this was valuable. I hope you found this information useful for you. And when you do get involved in your next purchase, you can use this accordingly to protect your interests and get a fair purchase price on the property.